Hello and welcome to My Politics. It is my pleasure to guest in the very first international interview here from the European Parliament, Mr. Riho Terras, a member of European Parliament from the EPP group in Estonia, and more precisely the Isamaa party, the Estonian mother party of you, sir, and the former commander of the Estonian Defense Forces. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, the first question is, we're just after the speech of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the leader of the Belarusian opposition here in the European Parliament, regarding the situation in Belarus. What are your thoughts, your overall thoughts in this first broad question? What are your overall thoughts on the speech she gave to the MEPs here in Strasbourg?
Well, for once, it was a very strong speech from a very strong woman. And I think it is important that she reminded all the members of European Parliament of the realities on the ground in Belarus. We all heard about violations of human rights in Belarus. We heard about how men and women of Belarus are tortured and jailed because of their political ideas. And she reminded us that even though European Union puts some sanctions on Belarus or even use strong words, this problem is not going away. This problem will remain even after the so-called migration crisis caused by the Putin's sidekick Lukashenko.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, just following on that, yesterday an MEP from Renew from Poland, Mrs. Róża Thun-Hochstein, said that it's important to remember about both the people that suffered in the Belarusian, in Lukashenko's regime, both right now at the border, at the EU border, but also the ones who are jailed right now for political reasons, political prisoners throughout since the election crisis in 2020. So do you also think that we have to look cumulatively at the crisis, at the democratic crisis in Belarus that we are living through right now?
Yeah, well, if we look only on the border, as most of the media right now does, then we will not talk about a cause of the problem, because that is just one of the means Lukashenko uses to push Europe to violate the solidarity of European countries. And if we take over the narrative of Lukashenko, we take over the narrative of Putin, and do not show solidarity behind Poland, then they achieve what they are aiming for.
Sir, you mentioned the surname. I want to mention in the next question. So Mr. Putin, the president of Russia, both in Poland but also internationally from time to time, from especially the extreme right and the extreme left, we can hear voices that perhaps Putin isn't involved. What do you think of these claims? Do you think that there's any substantiation in the claims that Vladimir Putin is not involved in the current crisis at the Belarusian border?
This is a childish naivety, and the problem is not just Belarus. Belarus is one of the hybrid attack lines of operation of current regime in Russia. But if we look at the gathering of the military troops on the border with Ukraine, if you look what is happening in the surroundings, how they turned down the gas for Moldova, how they pushed Georgia, everything, every bit of it is just to make sure that Putin gets his zone of influence, and if Europe is not talking in one voice, that is only in benefit of Russians. And so I think it is important, and we saw it in the last week, that Europe is behind Poland today. Europe does support Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and of course Estonia is a bit further and has no direct border with Belarus, but we understand that the same situation can happen even in Estonia. It happened in Finland, it happened in Norway. And the borders of European Union have to be defended, and I'm very happy and thankful for Polish government and Polish people that they stay strong on the borders of Europe.
Sir, I must ask, as both a Pole and a journalist, last month after the Prime Minister of Poland, Mr. Mateusz Morawiecki, visited the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, the debate surrounding not letting media onto the border arose. Do you think that the Polish government made a mistake not allowing NGOs, not allowing media, not allowing humanitarian organizations enter the border in the first months before the real crisis began?
I'm sure that the controlled entrance to media was possible, but the question is, if you are in the crisis and if you lead an operation in the crisis area, you don't know what is happening there. You'd rather get first information, make analysis and then act, and I think that was the moment. So I cannot blame Poland not letting NGOs and journalists for the first there. Now they are there, so it's no problem.
Now, going back to your military history as a general, as the chief of the Estonian commanding forces, what would you have done differently, or what do you think is the way in which we could resolve the problem militarily at the EU border, both in Poland, Latvia, but also in Lithuania?
Well, first of all, Estonian soldiers are today, as we talk, already on the border. We mobilized the force to strengthen the Polish border on the request of the Polish government. We stand very strongly with our very strong ally Poland. I'm sure the problems and the mistakes have been made in the past, not recognizing Lukashenko's regime as a real danger for European Union. And Lukashenko just saw that the sanctions, which were pretty mild, were not strong enough, so he could make a step further. Still, Austrian Raiffeisenbanken is operating, supporting Lukashenko's regime. Still, Estonian company called Bolt is investing millions in the Belarusian market. We should stop that. We should cut all the flow of resources to that government, which is not accepted by any of the European governments.
So should the European Union put the most extremely possible economic sanctions on Belarus as soon as possible?
Absolutely, absolutely. And to show that, that there is no way Europe is talking to a dictator, and I'm sure that every attempt to legalize Lukashenko as a president, and even in this house people talk about President Lukashenko, which he is not, so help him. So not a single government, head of government from Europe should talk to him on the equal basis.
Sir, the very last question I'd like to ask you is regarding the statement you put out on Twitter on November the 18th, where you wrote, and here I quote, "This is unacceptable that Merkel went solo behind the EU's back to talk with Mr. Lukashenko. This only shows discord in the EU, and this is exactly what Lukashenko is trying to achieve, appalling, reckless behavior. In your opinion, should the individual member states threatened by Lukashenko's regime, the Baltic states, Poland, make any contact with Lukashenko, or should it be done by EU's diplomats, or should the EU actually hold any diplomatic contact, any military contact with Belarus, with the Belarusian government whatsoever?"
Well, I just said, I'm sure Europe should talk in one voice, but the language should be sanctions and not trying to talk common sense to Lukashenko or Putin. I think it's ridiculous if a German chancellor, and she is an important person in Europe, talks to Putin, and Putin then tells her, you can solve the problem with Lukashenko. It's kind of a mafia behavior from the side of Putin, and it gives the narrative to the hands of dictators. Now, we don't know what they were talking about. Okay, Merkel probably knows, but I don't. But Lukashenko says that they agreed upon how they make a corridor through Poland. And every talk where German head of government talks with a Russian president about Poland is historically just ridiculous, because Polish history tells us that doesn't make any sense, is very wrong and very dangerous. So I don't think she has the real feeling, as the Germans say, Fingerspitzengefühl, about what is happening in Poland today.
Would you say it's diplomatic treason what Ms. Merkel has done?
Sorry?
Would you call it diplomatic treason to some extent?
It is naivety. It is ridiculous, and lame duck as she is today tries to solve the problem. Did she solve the problem? No, the problem is there. It doesn't disappear.
Thank you very much. My and your guest was the MEP from Estonia, Mr. Riho Terras. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.